Hello friends, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Detour from the Halloween cards I've been posting. This is for this week's Color Throwdown Challenge, which threw me for a loop for a second. It's craft, gray, and white. And I'm, in the midst of all the Halloween colors, all that fun stuff. But I started thinking, and then I realized I have this Cup of Love stamp set from Simon's Make Magic release. And I was like, ooh, gray, craft, kind of coffee colors. I can make this work. So I've got a piece of distressed watercolor paper, my MISTI. And I was just kind of figuring out how I'm going to lay out these images. I'm going to be die cutting them. But there's this little heart image in the set, and I thought I would heat emboss that first, and then I'll stamp the images, which will make sense in a second. You could actually skip all the coloring I'm going to do, and I'll show when I stamp it on the inside. There's a bunch of little, what do you want to, like latte toppers, the foamy topper type stamps in this set that you can just stamp rather than coloring coffee, all that stuff. But I really enjoy, doing a bit of watercoloring, that sort of a thing. So anywho, I'm stamping just a little heart here with clear embossing ink. I used my anti-static powder tool, and then I flipped the paper around and did it a second time because I want to have two cups and saucers, and then, 2 spoons, etc. So I did the heat embossing first because this will just make my life easier, because I wanted this little heart to be white, and then the cup I'm going to stamp in black ink and black VersaFine Clair, like Nocturne ink, which I showed in my last video. It takes a long time to dry, and it will pick up embossing powder. So this method to my madness works. So you can't really see the hearts. I can see them in real life. So I was able to just center the cup over the heart. And then I used a little twig stamp in the set, as well as a little spoon. Lined those up, and then I'm stamping them with that Nocturne ink. And then same thing. I can just flip the paper around and stamp everything a second time. So I have 2 sets of all my little images. This would also be something, if I wanted to make multiple cards with, I could just keep continuing the process. Do all the heat embossing at once, do all the stamping at once, etc., etc. So for my watercoloring, I'm just going to use some Distress Oxide sprays. You could use Distress Oxide inks, you could use Distress inks, you could use watercolors. I get asked that a lot. I like the sprays, I really do. And even watercoloring with them, there's something about the very liquid consistency of these that is still different than just smushing the Oxide inks, onto a palette and working that way. But again, you can do that too. It totally works. All of it works. It's just whatever you prefer. I just have fun watercoloring with the sprays. I don't know what it is. Like I said, it's like that weird liquid consistency of them. It just likes to do its own thing. And then you always discover every once in a while certain colors do really fun things when the pigments start to separate and move around, Anyway, coloring with these is very simple. I used hickory smoke. And then for the spoon, I actually mixed a tiny little bit of Prize Ribbon Oxide spray with the hickory smoke to get that more cool toned gray, so the spoons weren't the exact same color as the cup and saucer. So hickory smoke for my main gray, hickory smoke mixed with a teensy tiny bit of Prize Ribbon for the spoons. And then of course I'm going to use ground espresso for the coffee layer. I also have a little bit of Rustic Wilderness on my palette, and then that tiniest little bit of Prize Ribbon. So I just painted a layer with the hickory smoke, and then I went back in and added kind of a little bit of a shadow. Not too concerned about it, but it's like, why not while it's there? And then Rustic Wilderness for the greenery here. And yeah, not worried too much about keeping everything perfect. I like sort of sketchy images like this as well, that it's kind of double lined and that sort of a thing. Things just don't need to be perfect. I've been saying that a lot in videos, and I mean it. Perfection's overrated. So anywho, use the little tiny bit of Prize Ribbon on the little berries on that little sprig. And then I made sure everything was dry before I go in with the ground espresso. And this is why I white heat embossed that heart. So it kind of looks like, foamy latte art sort of a thing within reason. So it resists, because it's heat embossed, it resists the Distress Oxide ink, so I can just paint over it and we're good to go. So I added a little bit more to both of them, added a little bit more water so that when it dries, it kind of creates that multi-tonal sort of oxide look. And again, sped up the drying with my heat tool. You could always let it air dry. I don't have patience ever. So I just dried it with my heat tool, and then I cut this in half just to make it easier for the die cutting. And another little trick I figured out was with this cup and saucer image, like it's not a perfect circle. Perfection's overrated. But when trying to figure out how to line up the wafer die, I was like, crud. This is going to take a while. But I just kept turning it. And then once I did figure out like where it's lined up, I took a little Sharpie marker and just did a little like mark where the handle is. So then when I go to die cut the other one, and then when I go to use this again, I know exactly where to line it up and I don't have to sit and fiddle. Again, anything to make life easier and make things quicker because I don't have the patience. So once I figured it out the first time, I won't have to ever do it again. So I did that, and then I just taped these wafer dies into place with a little bit of my Spellbinders tape so that these don't move when I die cut them. And then I die cut all my images, and then I also die cut a little, like just a random scrap of Nina Desert Storm cardstock, my like go-to craft cardstock, love. And I actually die cut it just with one of the SLIMLINE nested rectangle wafer dies. So die cut that, and then I have my card base, which will be a top folding A2 card. I had a rough idea in my head of what I was going to do, you know, but I was still like figuring things out. So I decided I didn't want the card base to be completely plain. So I pulled out the Spring Flowers background stamp. I thought this kind of mimicked kind of the little sprig in the coffee set, you know, just a little bit. So I masked off at the fold of the card base. And then the stamp, I just put face up on my desk and I inked it up with Simon's Fog ink. So just a really nice light gray. This is like my go-to pale neutral gray sort of a color. So I inked up the stamp with that, brought the card front to it, pressed it down with my fingers, done. So I've got that bit of pattern, but it's just subtle. It's not super like in your face. So after I stamped that, I picked up this little trick from one of Debbie Hughes' videos. Actually, the Debbie Hughes video that she used the same stamp set, except she did her fabulous like no line watercoloring with the images, which just love. But she did this cool little thing, and I think she'd picked it up from someone else too, but it just, I was like sitting there with my jaw on the floor, you know, I was like, that's brilliant. So anywho, I put Distress Oxide spray on my little palette, added a bit of water, and then I'm just pressing the bottom of the bottle into that, and then basically stamping that onto my cardstock. So I'm getting coffee rings. Seriously. I remember looking at her card and I was like, man, you can freehand paint some circles. So amazing. Because it sounds simple, but trust me, like just drawing a circle, let alone painting circles, like, yeah, not easy. And I don't have patience for it. But then she showed this and I was like, that's so brilliant. So I had to do it on mine. So that's what I did. I stamped onto the card base as well as onto the Desert Storm panel. It's always interesting to see how different cardstocks take ink. The Desert Storm, it doesn't necessarily resist the ink, but the ink sits on it a little bit longer than it does on the white cardstock. So again, you just get different effects. I love it. And of course I added splatter. Gotta add splatter. I had it all sitting here. Why not? So I just swirled my brush in the ground espresso spray and then splattered that onto that Desert Storm panel, and then also splattered it onto the card base as well, because when in Rome, you just gotta do it. So added a bunch of splatter to both of these. Again, I could have done this in my splat box, but I've just been feeling, I don't even know. I've got a mess going on. Anyway. So on the inside of the card, I'm stamping the images. This time I'm inking up the saucer with just Hickory Smoke Oxide ink. And then I'm using one of those stamps that I was talking about earlier that's meant for like inside the coffee cup. And there's a few to choose from. There's like a solid one, a heart, a couple different heart ones, and then like a little like latte art image. But I inked that up with the ground espresso ink and stamped that. And it's so cute. So cute. So I did that, and then I stamped the sentiment. I had inadvertently managed to get some splatter on the inside of the card. I don't even know how I did that, but I did, which is fine. I'm just going to go with it. So I'm just going to add more, make it look a little more intentional. So picked up a little more from my palette, just lightly splattered that onto the inside of the card because, you know, it was intentional. And then let that dry. And then I'm just going to reinforce the score line on this card just with the side of my bone folder. And then I'm going to start like actually assembling. So I'm going to use some Big Mama foam tape just to give a little bit of dimension, but it's not super thick. Like when they call it Big Mama foam tape, I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this in a million videos, but it's because the size of the roll is massive. But the tape itself, the foam tape itself is like half as thick, if that, as your standard foam tape. That's why I use it so much. Like I make a lot of cards. I think I'm on my 3rd roll, maybe, if not only my 2nd. I forget how many years Simon's had this out, but yeah, like I love this foam tape. So anywho, I put that on the back of the coffee cups. And then I went through my stash and I found some gray and white baker's twine and wrapped that around the top of this little Desert Storm panel. Used my reverse tweezers to hold the little knot in place while I made my bow. This way I don't have to fiddle so much. Got the bow the way I wanted it, trimmed off the excess. I put more of the Big Mama foam tape on the back of this panel before adhering it to my card base. Once I have that adhered into place, I can start adhering my cups and spoons and all those things. The sentiment is from the Couple of set. I just white heat embossed it onto a little piece of black cardstock. And same thing, it accidentally got a bit of the Oxide, ground espresso Oxide on it. So same thing, I splattered the sentiment too, because why not? So got those into place. Everything's adhered. I have to add one final embellishment because it's just meant to be. I have the Trinity Stamps coffee bean heart sprinkles. These I've used in a ton of videos. I reach for these all the time. So a few of those ones, and also the creamy vanilla heart sprinkles because they're just the names of them, let alone the colors, were kind of perfect. So I adhered those into place, and that finished off this card. So just simple and fun, and you can kind of see that Oxide effect, especially with the ground espresso one, like how areas are kind of darker, and it's just fun. Anyway, as always, I'll have a link below the video to my blog post. I will link to the color throwdown challenge in my blog post as well. That'll be in the description box below the video, along with all the supplies I used, so you can check that out below if you are interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing, thumbs upping, commenting, all of it. I very much appreciate it, and I will see you all very soon in another video. Bye!